Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So today I want to talk in detail about the sacred core from the Vampire Chronicles. Now I know different vampire franchises have different origin stories for how vampires are created in that universe, and I'm going to explain each of them in time, but I thought I'd start with my favourite franchise, which is obviously the Vampire Chronicles. So let's talk about the sacred core. What it is, how it works, how it's applied to all vampires, where it comes from. But firstly, let's talk about Amel. Now Amel is the spirit that vampirism was created from. He was once an enhanced superhuman who built and ruled over Atlantis. He had a thirst for human blood and was also known as a Replomoid, one of 4 beings placed on Earth by an alien race. Now after Amel's death, his spirit remained on Earth along with his bloodlust. So, the origins of vampirism from the Vampire Chronicles stems back 6,000 years ago, back to a time when there was no pyramids and Egypt was known as the Kingdom of Kemet. It was ruled over by King Enkil and Queen Akasha. Now I've explained how Akasha became a vampire in a previous video, and I've even done a video on her entire life story. So if you want a detailed background that covers everything that led to those events, then you can click the cards or you can check out the end screens when this video concludes. Now many of you are already aware that Akasha is the very first vampire. That's no secret. At the moment of her death, which was at the hands of assassins, the Queen's soul was exiting her body but was caught by the spirit Amel, who then intertwined itself with it, forcing the soul and Amel back into Akasha's body, rapidly healing her and creating the very first vampire. Now, the spirit inhabited Akasha's brain and was therefore known as the sacred core, the source of what's therefore called the dark gift. Now, the dark gift is different for everyone. Some vampires can read minds, some can manipulate fire, some can retain their humanity, some can use telekinesis, in addition to other various powers. Each vampire has part of the essence of the sacred core, which all begins with Akasha. Now, to be the vessel of the core is very demanding, overwhelming and overbearing. It can render the person mindless if they don't harness the power correctly. Akasha discovered that by creating more vampires, it reduces the intensity of holding the sacred core and makes it more bearable. It was initially believed that a vampire would have to be at least 1,000 years old to be able to hold the core, but when you think about it, it actually contradicts the fact that Akasha was in her 20s and no more than minutes old as a vampire when the core settled within her, which therefore rules that theory out. Akasha is connected to every single vampire in existence, kind of like a tentacle system that stretches out to everyone the sacred core touches. Should the host of the core be killed, then it is believed all vampires would die with that host, but it's been shown that this doesn't happen instantly. There is time for the new host to devour the brain of the deceased in order to take the essence of Amel into themselves and become the new host of the sacred core. In the novel The Queen of the Damned, after Akasha was destroyed, the vampires felt weak and almost limbless, but they remained alive until Mikare devoured Akasha's brain. Now, when a new vampire is created, part of the essence of Amel is transferred into that being, which intertwines with their soul at the point of death. The overwhelming bloodlust that vampires experience is from Amel's initial bloodlust from when he was initially a spirit. Consuming blood fuels the part of the core within the individual and unlocks an even greater strength, greater speed, and keeps the individual fully active in terms of their connection to Akasha. The sacred core has only ever had 3 hosts and must always have a host in order for the vampire to survive, or so it was believed. It's clear as day that Akasha was the very first host of the sacred core and was for over 6,000 years. She was the first Queen of the Damned and planned on being the only one. When she awoke after millennia of inactivity, Akasha's plan was to wipe out 90% of the male population and start all over again, as she believed the human race had disgraced themselves. She was beheaded by Makare before consuming her brain, taking the core into herself and becoming the new Queen of the Damned. However, the core left Makare in somewhat of a mindless state, left her in a position of instability, which led her sister Maharet to rule in her place, despite not holding the core herself. Makare then offered herself to Lestat so the sacred core could be transferred into his body, which would make him the King of the Damned. Lestat was the core's host until the Replomoids assist the vampires in removing Amel from him, creating a body for Amel, and leaving the vampires being able to exist without a link to the core. This basically renders the core non-existent, as Amel was separated from the soul it was attached to. Nothing changed for the vampires except the link connecting them all together. What I am going to do is give you a complete insight of the events that led to Akasha becoming the first vampire, and it's something Anne Rice does really well. She links the surrounding factors of the story together so brilliantly. So Akasha was from a place called Uruk, which is now known as Warqa in modern day Iraq, and she arrived in Kemet, which is now modern day Egypt. Kemet meaning black land, which was in relation to the dark fertile soil of the land. So Akasha became King Enkil's bride as he had no sister to take as a wife, which was custom at the time to keep the bloodlines pure. She married Enkil and they ruled as King and Queen of Kemet. You'll most likely be aware that Akasha is portrayed as evil, cruel and unforgiving, as was her husband Enkil, but that wasn't always the case. The king and queen were good rulers at the beginning of their reign. They outlawed the practice of cannibalism and instructed their people to turn to farming, which was received incredibly well. However, all forms of cannibalism were banned, which included ritual cannibalism performed at funerals. The bodies instead were offered to the earth. This caused great outrage amongst the tribes across the land who had practiced this ritual for centuries. Though having good intentions at the beginning of their reign, Akasha and Enkil slowly became corrupt and showed no guilt for the bloodshed spilled by Enkil's great militia campaign, despite trying to steer their people away from violence at the beginning. Akasha became heavily interested in spirits and desired to know more. When she and Enkil had heard of the witch twins, Maharet and Makare, they invited them to court in order to witness their great power for themselves. The twins initially rejected Akasha's invitation, especially with the ban on ritual cannibalism, which their family had practiced for centuries. The twins were taken by force back to Kemet and questioned on their powers and beliefs, Akasha in particular wanting to know how they communicated with these invisible spirits. When the twins did call the spirits forth, Akasha put it down to weak tricks and condemned them both as blasphemers. To confirm her beliefs, she demanded that the spirit of Amel come forth, thinking it wouldn't, but come forth it did. Now, Amel is a very interesting spirit in that it has a lust for human blood. Being unable to take a completely solid form, Amel is able to leave cuts and nicks on human skin when moving incredibly fast, and then drinks the resulting drops of blood, which in turn gives the spirit a euphoric feeling and overwhelming rush of power. However, nicks, cuts, grazes, whatever you want to call them, were all Amel could actually do, so the spirit never truly got the full consumption of human blood. And this is exactly what Amel did do to Akasha when it was called forward, which as a result terrified the queen. Now, in response to Amel's behaviour, Cayman was ordered to rape the twins in front of the entire court, and this greatly angered Amel, and the spirit began haunting and terrorising Akasha, Enkil and Cayman, despite the latter very reluctant to participate in what happened to the twins. Amel's haunting got so bad, it made all three of their lives a complete misery, driving them to the point of insanity. While dealing with the spirit's constant bedevilment, the king and queen didn't pay much attention to the ongoings of court. They had many enemies. They were attacked by assassins and left for dead. As Akasha's soul began to leave her body, Amel intertwined his essence with the soul and forced the combination of the two back into the queen's body, rapidly healing her. Now a spirit has joined with a soul and now fully occupies human flesh, something never thought possible, therefore creating the very first vampire. With the essence of Amel within her brain and heart, it became known as the Sacred Core. Having the sacred core within one being was so overwhelming, so overbearing, that it almost brought Akasha to the point of becoming mindless, a trance-like state, a state of nothingness. It was only through turning Enkill into a vampire did it bring some relief from the power of the core. After turning Cayman, Akasha realized that the more vampires that were made, the more stable she would be when holding the core within. And something that was heightened through Akasha herself was Amel's incredible lust for human blood. Akasha received a rush of euphoria combined with power, adrenaline and total inner satisfaction. There was nothing like it. Akasha and Enkill drank and drank for centuries. Everything and anything human that was in their sights they consumed. They could read the minds of anyone of whom they wished. They had super strength, super speed, but an insatiable thirst for human blood. Their sensitivity to sunlight led them to believe that the sun god Ra had forsaken them and wanted to punish them at every chance possible, meaning that the king and queen could now only go out at night. As the centuries passed, they tried to pass themselves off as gods, but as humans quickly discovered that feeding from the gods could give them immortality, and both Akasha and Enkill were entrapped in a diorite prison, leaving only their heads and necks exposed. This way, they could both take victims and be easily robbed of their own ancient and most powerful blood. They were rendered incapable of escaping, defending themselves or destroying themselves, thus taking the rest of the race with them into death. They spent centuries in this state, and in defiance of their captors, they refused to feed on their victims. They spent centuries in this state and in defiance of their captors, then refused to feed from victims. Even when they did escape, they became living statues with skin that appeared the texture of marble. As Akasha and Enkill are the very first vampires, anything that happens to them will therefore affect all current vampires in existence, which means their bodies must be kept safe, kept preserved, and therefore they became those who must be kept. And we will leave it there for today, everyone. That is how Akasha, the Queen of the Damned, became the very first vampire. If you want a detailed version of Akasha's entire life, then please feel free to watch that video. It will be on the end screen. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate the support. If you like this video, then please hit that like button. It tells YouTube that you enjoyed what you've just watched and will be recommended my videos more often. And if you want to join me on this journey with vampire folklore, then please hit that subscribe button. Thanks again, and I will see you all very soon.